2024 has been another banger year for gaming, and for me personally, it even outdid last year. As always, I've also replayed some old games this year, and they're also gonna be on this list. But without further ado, let's get right into the list, because that's what you're probably here for.
Can't just run away from your problems, Indiana.
Watch me.
This first game is a pretty late entry to the list, since at the time of recording, this game came out about 2 weeks ago, but I'm still so happy that Indiana Jones and the Great Circle turned out as good as it did. It could have just as easily been a soulless cash grab like the most recent indie movie, or literally any other Disney movie in the last 2 years. I was optimistic when they first revealed the game, but as time went on and we saw gameplay, I got a bit skeptical. It didn't look bad, it just wasn't what I expected. I thought the first person perspective wouldn't work, and the gameplay wasn't anything to write home about either. But boy am I glad to have been wrong. When the reviews started releasing, they were all really positive, and after playing the game, I can only reaffirm that yes, the game really is very good. I typically don't enjoy stealth games that much, but it's not that bad here. I still wouldn't call the gameplay particularly good. The AI is terrible, and you can get away with almost anything. The puzzles are so bad sometimes that I started questioning the competency of the ancient tribes that you learn about throughout the game.
That's clever. They could choose where to shine the light. Watch it! Look at that.
The thing that carries this game is definitely the story. It's not really that good of a story, but it's a great Indiana Jones story, and that's really rare in 2024. It perfectly captures the atmosphere of the original trilogy, and it really makes you feel like Indy. The villain is fittingly over the top, and the Great Circle works well as a plot-driving device. The new characters all fit the universe really well, and all the recurring characters that we know from the original movies are accurate, and the voice acting is also on point. There's not really much else to say. Indiana Jones and the Great Circle really is a great game, and I would highly recommend it if you're an indie fan.
Locations impacting elevator sectors Delta.
While other survival games focus on the actual survival aspect of a game, Pacific Drive focuses on an entirely different entity. Your car. You get transported into something called the Exclusion Zone, which is basically this area within which supernatural activities happen. There's flying traffic lights, UFOs, electrically charged tumbleweeds, and many other weird creatures. The main gameplay loop consists of maintaining your car, driving deeper into the zone, collecting resources, making a mad dash back to your base before the storm catches you, upgrading your car, and repeat until you figure out what's going on. This gameplay loop is immensely satisfying, and it never gets old over the around 20 hours of gameplay that it will take to get to the core of the zone. All this is set to an intriguing story which isn't the deepest thing in the world, but it gets the job done. It wraps up neatly with a satisfying conclusion and an epic final drive through the zone. The set pieces were all exciting, and I can't even count the amount of times I barely managed to get back to the base safely, with my car basically only consisting of wheels and a steering wheel. The game also has a unique art direction that really ties everything together. It's just a consistently enjoyable game with some pretty cool moments, well fleshed out survival mechanics, and a nice narrative to go with it. Sometimes that's all a game really needs to be. I upgraded my PC this year and was finally able to play a VR game that I always wanted to experience. That game is of course Half-Life Alyx. There is nothing left to say about this game that hasn't already been said, and even though that's one of the most cliché lines I could have used, it doesn't make it any less true. 4 years after its release, Half-Life Alyx is still one of the best VR games ever made. You can interact with so many items, and even the smallest of entities can interact with each other and react to the player's interactions. The guns feel excellent to shoot, and there's there's a surprisingly varied range of enemies. Some of the puzzles could get a bit annoying, and the story can be a bit slow sometimes. Thankfully, the game saves the best for last and gives you a power trip unlike anything I've seen in VR, and actually ends on a high note, with subverting expectations of what a prequel is. The game looks stunning, and I'm surprised at how well it runs. The story could have been a bit better, but it is still by all means a very Half-Life story, which is important since this story is a prequel and/or sequel to a game released 20 years ago. Though I enjoyed my time with Half-Life Alyx, I do feel like there are several other games that left a bigger impact on me, which is why Half-Life Alyx takes the number 8 spot on this list. Astrobot was such a joy to play through, but at the same time it managed to really infuriate me. Not because the game was difficult or because it's poorly designed, quite the opposite in fact. I was really annoyed that this game paid more attention to PlayStation's exclusives and identity than Sony themselves have in years. Especially since Sony started complaining of not having any IP. I'm sorry, do all the franchises you haven't bothered to do anything with in the past decade not count? It astounds me then that a game that at first glance looks like a glorified PlayStation commercial pays homage to all these forgotten franchises in such a detailed and loving way. Not only that, but Astrobot is just plain fun to play. There's creativity oozing from every pixel of this platformer, and no level looks or plays like the rest. Sure, there are several recurring items, like frog boxing gloves or a time-slowing VR headset, but each time they show up, the game adds a mechanic or improves on the level design in such a way as to not make it feel stale. The game is truly all killer, no filler, and managed to keep me smiling all the way until the credits rolled. In a slow year for Nintendo platformers, Astrobot managed to be an amazing and much needed change of pace, and it makes me happy to see that the last fragments of Japan's studio are still able to create a must-have title for PS5 owners. I am so happy that this won Game of the Year. Congratulations to Team SOB, this game definitely deserved it. This is the second game on the list that didn't release this year, but DLC for it did. And since the Game Awards allowed a DLC to be nominated for Game of the Year, I think I'm allowed to place Alan Wake 2 on my Game of the Year list. And I will even go a step further than Jeff by not even bothering to talk about the DLC and instead only talking about the base game. Alan Wake 2 is one of the weirdest and most creative survival horror games I've played in a while. Most modern survival horror games focus on action or the horror aspect, and while Alan Wake 2 does do this occasionally, most of the time you either have to play as the titular character himself while solving puzzles, where the words you pick on a blackboard change the environment around you, or fight your way through a literal live-action musical sequence, all whilst unraveling what is actually going on in this weird dimension you're trapped in. Or solve the mystery of a story come to life as a new character, Saga Anderson. I really hope that at least a part of this explanation made sense, because it's really difficult to talk about this game without spoiling anything, though not as difficult as a later game on this list. Now that I hopefully renewed your attention span, I think we can move on to the next game.
You think you have the strength to protect the weak? Then prove to me these are more than empty words.
Metaphor ReFantazio is a game that touches on some very important themes that other media rarely does. Seriously, this might be the first major game to have the importance of fiction as one of its core themes. At least, no others come to mind. This game was well on its way to be the number 2 spot, and I thought...
It's already number 2. There's no way it's gonna lose that. Like, it would have to nosedive through multiple cliffs, somehow not break, go into the ocean, fall off an oceanic cliff, down into the trench. Oh no, there's a hole that goes down into the crust. Oh, somehow we went through the earth, around the core, and now we're going up the cliffs just to fall back down them again. That's how it would have to do.
But then the last third hit.
Okay, I just thought of how that could happen.
In the last 20 hours of the game, an amalgamation of narrative, pacing, and gameplay problems come together in a way that soured my experience with the game quite a bit. I'm going to have to go into some spoilers here, since I can't really explain my problems with it otherwise, so skip to the timecode on screen if you haven't played it and are interested, because those first 2/3 of the game are excellent, and I would still recommend the game even if I have a lot of problems with it. Just know that my main criticism revolves around the later story and gameplay elements. Okay, spoiler time in 3, 2, 1. The game has a calendar system, and on September 10th, you and your party decide to finally kill the main villain Luis, who is on his way to become king and basically destroy and rebuild the entire world. Only a specific weapon can kill him because he's protected by the king's magic, and to kill him they decide to reference Abraham Lincoln's death by killing Luis in a theater during a concert. You walk past a suspiciously boss arena shaped area and go in for the kill with a magic spear, which is the only thing that you can kill Luis with. You manage to hit him, but oh no, he survives, so now you have to have a boss fight. You win, and it really looks like Luis is dead, and the spear is secured, because one of your party members can see magic emanating from objects, so of course you would be able to tell if this was a fake spear, right? Right? This could have been a really interesting way to introduce a new villain into the story, and they even reveal some evil things that the new villain contender has done. Like I said, the game is really good at setting up interesting twists and then not following through on them, and this is what most of my frustrations with this game boil down to. Anyway, of course, nope, Luis is back because a character you killed at the very start of the game survived, and nobody noticed that it was him, checking that Luis was actually dead and taking the spear. This was really disappointing because... Cover your ears, Megaten fans, because I'm about to compare an Atlas game to Persona. Ooh. Because Persona has a main villain for most of the game, only to introduce a god in the last few hours for you to fight. This would have been a really cool way to create a new, more menacing villain, but no, we just have to have Luis back. A while later you fight Luis a second time. And he's also the final boss, so you have to fight him a third time. And by that time, I didn't even think he was menacing anymore, because I'd already beaten him twice. The following 2 days are also full of massive reveals, and the levels of enemies in the next dungeon are also increased by an unreasonable amount, so I can only assume there was some cut content. The final boss is also very disappointing. In his final phase, he just suddenly gets 12. Yes, 12 turn icons. I was so annoyed by this, since to even get close to the final boss level, I would have needed to grind around 20 levels. So instead, I just turned the difficulty down and focused on social links. Okay, now that was a long rant, but I don't want to undermine the things that the game does well. Even though I didn't enjoy the last third of the game, I still thought that the first 40 hours of it were amazing. The ending was really good as well, and really spoke to me, since the power of fiction is something I was very interested in the last 2 years or so. I think I might do a video on Metaphor in the future, so that's where I'll leave it for now. An excellent game that barely misses the mark. I promise this is the last non-2024 game on this list, but I just really feel the need to include this one. The reason I feel that way is that since Outer Wilds came out in 2019, no other game has really even tried to achieve what Outer Wilds has, or at least none that I know of. Just like with Half-Life Alyx, I believe that everything about Outer Wilds has already been praised so much that my praise would be redundant. Instead, being the Twitter user that I am, I wanted to talk about the things the game does poorly. I think this is necessary for me to say because otherwise you could make the argument that this should be number 1 on this list. To do this, I probably need to explain the game's structure. Again, Outer Wilds is a very special game, so I would highly advise to skip to this timecode if you don't want any spoilers for it. You are an alien astronaut that gets to explore space. However, 22 minutes after you wake up from a nap you were taking, the sun explodes. Don't worry though, you're also in a time loop and get to experience this whole process over and over again. What makes the structure of the game interesting is that you aren't given any hints or objectives, and your curiosity is supposed to be your drive to push forward. You can jump from one hint to the next and assemble the story like a puzzle. This structure works really well, and it really is baffling how so little can be broken in this type of narrative. I can truly not understate what kind of a monumental achievement this is. This is why it makes me so mad that exactly 2 things is what it took to sour this otherwise perfect experience. The first one is one of the final puzzles I did in the game. I'm not gonna say what puzzle it was, since I don't want to spoil it for anyone who hasn't played the game yet and for some reason is still here and hasn't skipped to the non-spoiler section, and maybe you're smart enough to solve it on your own. I just need to mention this because this is what caused my second, and in my mind much more severe problem. For hours I just followed even the smallest trace of a hint, only to find out that there wasn't one, and that I had already received the closest thing to a hint to that puzzle. In fact, in those hours I only only encountered information I already knew. But since the game doesn't really have a system in place to mark hints for places you've already been to without seeing the hint itself first, I kept thinking that there was more stuff to find, when it was really all just information I already knew. Again, I don't really know a better way to explain this, I just hope that this is sufficient. I might have seemed a bit negative, but I don't want to downplay this game's achievement, and I did enjoy my time with it. In fact, it might be one of my top 15 favorite games ever. I also think that it's important to shine some light on some less good aspects of a game, so that similar games can learn from those and improve. That took way longer than expected, but point is, you should play Outer Wilds. I don't know how to properly transition to the next game, so let's just move on to the next game. From here on out, the games get so good that I either couldn't find anything to complain about, or the game is so exquisite in some areas that I can overlook the flaws in others. Animal Well is definitely part of the former. Not only does it have some of the best atmosphere and art direction in any game I've played this year, it also has some of the best gameplay. The loop is essentially just explore, solve puzzles, find item, progress, repeat. So in that sense, it's just like any other Metroidvania. Where it differs is the character you play as, the world, and the items themselves. You play as a little blob guy who can only run and jump. The world you run and jump in is one of the most beautiful yet eerie and mysterious worlds I have ever seen. It achieves its desired effect of feeling like a jungle where you're the prey and everything around you is dangerous. The items are also some of the most impressive displays of creativity in any game this year. Some of them include a frisbee, bubbles, and a yo-yo. I kept finding more and more ways to use these items up until the very end of the game. Not all of these use cases were intended, but they added another layer to the world that honestly blew me away every time. The game is also fairly short, which encourages replays or exploring every nook and cranny of the world, because there are a lot. And I mean a lot of secrets in this game. What I found really interesting was the lack of combat in Animal Well. Usually, Metroidvanias have at least some form of combat. The most combat Animal Well gets is making a chameleon eat hedgehogs. Sometimes you'll find a calm and peaceful room, be it filled with capybaras or some other animal that means no harm. This juxtaposition can sometimes be so beautiful, and combined with this game's soundtrack, Animal Well has a one-of-a-kind world that I won't soon forget. All of this would have made for an interesting game already, but since I talked about the items and the gameplay loop, you can probably guess that I still need to talk about the puzzles. Sure, the puzzles might not be that deep, but they each have the tendency to make you feel clever once you solve them, striking the perfect balance of being not too easy but not too difficult at the same time. Animal Well might not have a story that I can gush over, but it sure as hell is the most mesmerizing game I have played this year.
I got a letter. The name on the envelope said Mary. My wife's name. It's ridiculous. Mary died of that damn disease 3 years ago. So then why am I looking for her?
Since its release in 2001, Silent Hill 2 has become one of, if not the most influential horror game of all time, inspiring countless indie games, sequels, and most importantly, YouTube video essays. In 2022, a trailer for a remake was announced and everybody was hating on it. And I get it, Konami sucks and there's a reason why so many people hate it. However, the hate that Blooper Team, the developers of the remake, got was staggering. And you know what? All of these people owe Blooper Team an apology, because they absolutely knocked it out of the park. This remake is anything anyone could have hoped for, from the updated graphics that managed to faithfully recreate the dreamy atmosphere of the original, to the implementation of a combat system that doesn't make you want to throw your controller at the TV. The confusing puzzles from the original have been more streamlined, but there is the higher difficulty option for puzzles if you really want to make them harder. I could gush over the story and its characters, or theorize about what philosophical meaning some aspects of the game have, but that has already been done to death, so I'm not gonna do that. Instead, I'm just gonna highly recommend it to you, because unlike number 1 spot on this list, I do think this is a story that anyone who likes games should experience at least once. For how deep it is, it's surprisingly short and accessible, and even if you're not into games, which probably isn't the case if you're watching this video, you can wait for the movie and hope that it'll turn out good. On a side note, I do think that the director is low-key cooking. Let French guy cook. Even though the reception for this remake was excellent for the most part, there still were some die-hard fans sat in front of their better quality CRTs watching with horror as the good reviews rolled in. It's safe to say that this remake was divisive in the core fanbase. You might be wondering why I'm even talking about this. Well, that's because this isn't even the most controversial remake on this list. That spot proudly goes to my game of the year. I have a lot to say about Persona 3 Reload, but unfortunately I'm going to have to get into spoilers to do that. What I will say before that is, this game is not for everyone. If you don't like turn-based RPGs, you probably won't enjoy a big chunk of Persona 3 Reload. If you don't enjoy slow stories that have a gradual build-up before they start firing on all cylinders, you won't enjoy Persona 3 Reload. If you don't like games that introduce new characters late into the game, or characters getting developed late into the story, you probably won't enjoy Persona 3 Reload. If you don't mind or even like those things, then I believe you, like myself, will at least enjoy, if not love, Persona 3 Reload, and I would strongly recommend it. Skip to this time frame if you want to avoid spoilers, and let's get into it. For a while, I didn't really know how to start this part of the video, so I think I'm gonna start with how I even came to enjoy Persona 3 Reload as much as I did. It was at the beginning of March. Late last year, I bought an Xbox Series X off a friend for a relatively cheap price, but since then it has pretty much just been sitting around gathering dust, since I'd already played all the games that interested me and I'd rather just buy newer games for my PS5. In February, my Twitter feed started filling up with screenshots and clips from a game called Persona 3 Reload. The game looked interesting, and the mechanic of high schoolers shooting themselves in the head to essentially summon their Pokemon looked weird, yet also so unique and interesting. I had heard about Persona before, specifically Persona 5, but didn't really know anything apart from it being a turn-based RPG. And since I didn't really play any turn-based RPGs apart from Pokemon, thinking the mechanics would be too deep and the menus too annoying to navigate, I didn't really give Persona 5 much mind. In March, I noticed that the game was on Game Pass, and since I didn't really have anything else that I wanted to play, I decided to give the game a shot. I booted it up and... Why did the characters have guns? Oh my god, Persona summoning. Did that just morph into a string player? There's a calendar system and I have to manage time? Look at how many personas there are to summon. How cool are the social links? I love stories within stories. The Dark Hour? What's that menacing tower about?
More like Stupe, Ace Defective.
Ace Defective.
48 hours later.
Tori, you're kidding, right? Chidori. Say something, please. Chidori.
And then... Persona 3 Reload has its flaws. The first act is a bit too long and the combat can be too easy, as well as some twists in the story being bad. But when a game manages to hit this hard and be this emotional, I can forgive all its shortcomings. Playing the first half of Persona 3 gave me a unique yet familiar feeling. It's mundane but also cozy. Playing the second half of Persona 3 devastated me. I got so attached to the characters in Persona 3 Reload that I didn't want it to end, and I didn't even realize it. Persona 3 Reload hit me out of nowhere, and it is now the second game that has been able to make me cry, and we're on a 2-year streak with that one. Once Persona 6 gets revealed, I plan to do a retrospective / critique of all the mainline modern Persona games, and I will probably go in reverse order because this game really means a lot to me and I don't want to mess it up. Thanks to all of that, Persona 3 Reload is by far my game of the year, and also has become one of my top 3 favorite games of all time.